Okay, so this is a little chart that I made up because what would eschatology be without a chart? And sometimes I find that my mind is inclined to try to visualize things um, in graphic terms as opposed to trying to write them down in words. And I'm not saying one to the exclusion of the other, but I'm saying sometimes diagrams help. So this is my attempt to sort of chart out the direction of my eschatology that I'm forming in contrast to and in dialogue with Israel only, as well as full preterism in general. So what do we have here? So I know this is hard. I probably should have used a bold marker for this now that I think of it, but I'll try to zoom in a little bit. And what we have here in the beginning, so we have a temple which I have labeled the old heavens, and this is the literal second temple before it was destroyed, and it's on a plot of land which I have labeled the old earth. So we have the old heavens and earth. We have a temple, and we have the city proper where the dwellers lived. And this city was in covenant with God, and God was said to be enthroned above the cherubim in that temple. So it was constructed in such a way as to evoke heaven, to evoke heavenly realities. So this was God's throne on earth at the time. So this is the dwelling, this was the dwelling of God's covenant people. These were the people that were in covenant with God at the time were dwelling here. All right, so what we have here is this path indicates the 40 years of apostolic preaching in the apostolic age. What I've also labeled is the ingathering of the Israel of God. Okay, this is the initial phase of the outreach to the Gentiles. This is the introduction of the ministry of Paul, who was raised up with a specific mission to the Gentiles. And as we know through Romans 9 and 11, that he drew heavily on promises to the lost tribes of Israel. And this is where I'm in dialogue with Israel only. There were promises to the lost tribes of Israel in Hosea that when they were disinherited and the covenant was reversed, they were made into Gentiles and seeded into the nations to become one and the same as the nations. All right. So that became the mechanism. Actually, the Paul's ministry to the Gentiles became the mechanism by which those lost tribes that were seeded would be gathered back. Now, this is where I derivate from Israel only. They would say that only lost people that had the DNA were the only ones that the Holy Spirit was electing to salvation. Previous videos I've shown that to be false. How have I shown it to be false? Because in every era of Israel's history, in every era of, I should say, the biblical history, there has never been a time where it was just Israel ethnically. It was either pure Gentile, as would be the case for all the people, all the saints prior to Abraham, or it was a mixture, albeit the majority were Abrahamic descent peoples, but there was always a mixture, and there were always stipulations that for those that sojourn in the land and would worship Yahweh and engage in the covenant, that there would be one law for the foreigner as well as for the native born. And this was repeated over and over and over and over again. And we learn when we look in the book of Hebrews, it gives us a hint of why that was so central a message. And it was because in the light of eschatology, this was never the real homeland. None of the people, not even the descendants of Jacob who lived here, were actually in their homeland. In fact, by the first century, the New Testament writers would consider this Babylon, so that the returnees from Babylon that occurred a few centuries prior to the first century, they had not really returned, because this was, spiritually speaking, Babylon. So there was never the eschatological return either of the 10 tribes or Judah. None of them had returned yet. So this is where the return begins to happen, in this, to the Jew first and then to the Gentile. All right, and there's there are time constraints on this particular phase. Now, this particular phase is terminated here at AD 70, but this is where Israel only says that the entire program of God terminates, and there's no more salvation, nothing on earth that would intersect with what God is doing with people. No continuity. This is where I'm in strong disagreement with Israel only, Jason DaCosta, and where I'm devoting a lot of time to overhaul and deconstruct. This is a way that people who have no faith anymore now openly mock the faith, have found ways to justify their own sin and to be comfortable with it by destroying the faith that would expose it. And this is how they do it. But as I showed in previous videos, only one phase was terminated here. Only one phase in the mission to the nations. One verse that I want to look up in particular here in this context is Isaiah 49. Let me open up my Bible here. We'll go to Isaiah 49. Okay. Isaiah 49. Okay, this is in the servant section, where Israel is seen first. Israel is seen as a servant, as a light to the Gentiles, and then we get to Isaiah 53, and it becomes centralized in a person. But here, listen, O coastlands, to me, and take heed, you peoples from afar. The Lord has called me from the womb, from the matrix of my mother. He has made mention of my name, and he has made my mouth a sharp sword. In the shadow of his hand he has hidden me, and made me a polished shaft. In his quiver he has hidden me. Now, what you're going to see here is that the context overwhelmingly is Israel as a whole. It's not really focusing yet on the one who sums up and is like the head of Israel, that sums up in one person this whole mission. But he says here in verse 3, and he said to me, you are my servant, O Israel. Okay, so Israel is a servant, in whom I will be glorified. Then I said, this is Israel speaking. Then I, Israel, said, I have labored in vain. I have spent my strength for nothing and in vain. Yet surely my just reward is with the Lord, and my work with my God. And now the Lord says, who formed me from the womb to be his servant, to bring Jacob back to him. Okay, so here we're talking about the return of Jacob, which is inclusive of all 12 tribes, okay? So that Israel is gathered to him, for I shall be glorious in the eyes of the Lord, and my God shall be my strength. Indeed, he says, okay, now it seems to be that he has switched to a person, because it seems to be, there seems to be a person and distinct, that it is Israel, but it's distinct from Israel in the sense it's bringing Israel back. So listen here. So that Israel is gathered to him, for I shall be glorious in the eyes of the Lord, and my God shall be my strength. Indeed, he says, and here's where we get the two phases of the mission to the nations. Is it too small a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Judah and to restore the preserved ones of Israel. Okay, stop. Here we see clearly he's talking about the regathering of the exiles of the tribes of Jacob. We're not just talking about Judah, we're talking about all the tribes, okay? So he says that's one mission, and that's great. That's glorious. But, whoa, this is a too small a thing to do that? Look what else you're going to do. I will also give you as a light to the Gentiles, that you should be my salvation to the ends of the earth. Okay, so there's your two phases. Let's go back to here. Here's that first phase where in that messianic mission to raise up the tribes of Jacob right here. This is what the Israel-only people want to collapse everything into this period here. And what this passage in Isaiah does supremely, and other passages which I mentioned in previous videos shows this is just the first phase. Because what we have to do is, if Israel is going to be a light to the world, to the, what does it say here? To the ends of the earth, not just to the where the exiles of Israel are, but to the very ends of the earth. We have to, if Israel is going to be a light to the ends of the earth, we have to get Israel up and running. Okay, we have to get Israel up and running. It has to be, it can't be this Israel anymore. This Israel was just a type. It wasn't even the homeland of the Israelites. Hebrews says they were strangers and foreigners looking for a heavenly city. Okay, then they were in exile. Okay, and here, the first phase of the Messianic mission, let's regather the lost tribes of Israel and get Israel up and running as a functioning tool that can shine light to the far ends of the earth. Okay, so here we come with AD 70. This is the cataclysmic event. This is where this passes away. The old heavens and the old earth are destroyed. It's gone. This is the transition from type to reality, from the earthly to the heavenly. Remember, they were looking for a heavenly city. It all happens here. This is the time of the fulfillment of the eschatology of Israel. Now, as you can see, beyond this boundary, we see this direction going up into the heavenlies, because this, not down here on earth, but up here is where the new heavens is situated. Down here is the new earth. Okay, so we have two planes that post AD 70 exist on, okay? Because these are this is still the earthly realm, still continues. This is the history, the ongoing history of the far ends of the earth, the nations, the ones whom Jerusalem in her fulfilled role as light to the nations acts down here, okay? Now you see this little church here, okay? This is different from here. In fact, if you look in Revelation 20 and 21, there's mention of a distinction between when Gog and Magog, after the millennium, it says that Satan is going to be unleashed for a little while, and he's going to go after the camp of the saints and the beloved city. So there's a distinction. You can't make those saying the same thing, because the camp was reminiscent of prior to Israel coming into her inheritance. So she was encamped out in the wilderness. So it's using this imagery to describe life on earth that's ongoing past AD 70. And I have a picture of a church here, a church staple. Okay, this is the camp of the saints. They are still in the wilderness because they have not come up here to the heavenly city yet. But they are in relationship because it's a new heavens and a new earth. Okay, there is a unity. We call this the communion of the saints, of the living and the dead. There was a real resurrection here at AD 70. All the dead in Christ were raised. All the dead saints prior to AD 70, going back, all the way back to Adam, they were all raised literally here, and they became the New Jerusalem temple. Now, see here, where do I have 144,000, this number? This is symbolic, and you have to be careful. Israel only exploits that and just misuses it, gets away from the symbolism. It has to be symbolic of the full, complete number of God, the people of God, because Hebrews tells us quite clearly, all the saints prior to Abraham inherit the same heavenly city that the descendants of Abraham inherit. So that means this gathering of the 144,000, it wasn't literally just tribes people. It encompassed even Noah and Abel and Enoch and all the people that were before. So this is just a symbolic number to it's drawing on the type, the earthly type, where all Israel was composed of 12 tribes. It's saying this is all Israel, okay? And all Israel is going to encompass everybody, even before Israel was a nation. Okay, so they all come up here. This is the resurrection at AD 70. They all come up here. Boom. The age to come. This is the age to come. It's a post-mortem reality. This is my critique now that's ongoing with full preterism. They would say, they would put these two together on earth, okay? And they would say that the age to come is down here as well, that in AD 70, the age to come is experienced down here. And that is not true, and that opens the door to Israel-onlyism, universalism, all kinds of crazy stuff. Whenever you look at descriptions of the age to come, it's always a post-mortem heavenly reality. So the age to come did come in AD 70, but it's on this plane of reality. It's up here, and you don't experience it until you pass from this life down here up to here. And that's why I have these arrows and multiple arrows to indicate individuals are constantly dying here into this realm up here. There's no death in the sense of some intermediate state. It's, as Paul would say, a change. They're changed. In the twinkling of an eye, they go right straight up into here. Meanwhile, there is interaction between the land of the living here and the New Jerusalem up here. It says that the light here, the Gentiles down here will walk in its light. So they're down here, signified by this church, which is a multinational, international entity. They're walking in the light up here. And that light comes from opening the scriptures, opening the pages of the New Covenant writings of the apostles, and reading them in the light of fulfillment and calling people, lost people, to Christ. All right, and then they come into here. They're in the camp of the saints. They're going. It says the gates are opened. And I believe, too, that that's symbolic, that there is intercourse here, that you can walk through symbolically the gates to worship. It says that the kings of the earth bring their glory into it, but it doesn't seem to indicate that they live there. They're just kind of coming in to worship. It also says there's leaves of healing here for the nations, so that's being brought down in addition. So you've got light coming down, you've got leaves for healing coming down, and then you've got people up here responding in worship. And then, as I said again, as you pass on physically, boom, you're up here, you're in there. All right. Now, where's the millennium? Well, millennium begins here because it's after the martyrs are raised, which happens here. So the millennium is post AD 70. It's going on now, but it's not here. That's the thing. The millennium is the saints ruling up here. It's the rule in the New Jerusalem that signifies the effects of light and life and everything down here that's coming down here, all the benefits. All right, so the saints are reigning and ruling up there, that's where the millennial rule is with Christ. So let's see, what else have I got here? So this day of the Lord, the day of the Lord begins here and it's ongoing. And so up here, I would call it the millennium. In this realm down here, it's the day of the Lord. Sort of speaking of the same, it's just coterminous, two coterminous designations. And so the day of the Lord happens down here. It's where judgment, it's continually happening to people down here. They're continually, when you die, you're judged. All right. As you're judged, you either end up here in destruction like a fire, or you experience the resurrection, who is Christ himself, and you come up there. So I would hold that the day of the Lord is a rolling day of the Lord that began in AD 70 and it continues. And as the scriptures say, a day is a day in the Lord's sight is as a millennium, is as 1,000 years. So they're almost the same thing. It's just, it's like, okay. And I guess that's about it. I hope that was a helpful chart to explain kind of where I'm going. There are this is a strong preterism. I don't think at this point that you can call it full preterism because, I'm correcting things in full preterism. I'm taking the millennium and I'm taking it out of this time and I'm putting the millennium post AD 70. So this is in common with James Stewart Russell. So I'm not sure if he would be categorized as full preterist. I don't think he is. This is very similar to Duncan McKenzie, the late Duncan McKenzie and Douglas Wilkinson. I believe they call their view the premillennial preterism. I don't know if I know that I disagree probably at certain points with them, so I don't want to classify myself as that, but this is kind of where I'm going, and it's not complete, and I'm always open to correction, but this is sort of the direction I'm going in, and it makes sense to me. It makes a lot of sense. We don't need to have any eschatology beyond here because this is sufficient. This is an ongoing day of the Lord. This is, these realities will continue as long as the earth continues, as long as humanity continues on the earth. Eventually, all the people called by the Lord into Christ will all eventually be in a heavenly reality. And this, I guess we could assume with the scientists that this realm will eventually just collapse into nothingness and oblivion. Billions of years ahead of us. But maybe we'll have a nuclear war that will end humanity a long time before that. Who knows? It doesn't matter. Because this is the destiny of the saints. This is the destiny of those who reject Christ. This is all the eschatology we need. This is all we need. The new covenant continues forever. The new heavens continues forever. The new earth, in terms of this will all eventually, when the physical dwelling place is eventually gone and there are no more humans, this will just completely all be one, unified. God will be all in all. So there you have it. That's it. Have a good day. Chart eschatology.